I was diagnosed with a brain tumor out of nowhere. My whole head started to go, but I was completely conscious during this time. So I was kind of just at the coffee table with family, like, what is going on? Before the surgery, I wrote to the surgeon a letter saying, if I'm incapacitated after the surgery, because that was one of the risks, I might not be able to speak or move. I do not consent to having chemotherapy and radiotherapy. I knew the stress is the number one killer, the number one thing we got to, work on when you've got cancer. The cancer was a wake-up call, and it said, this is your chance.
Hello, Gillian. I was going to say good morning. It's good morning for me, but it is not good morning for you. You are in London or in the UK. And I had the pleasure of meeting you last year when I was there in London, and it was such a pleasure to meet you. And you have been part of our program for a while, but I had never heard your story, and it is such an amazing story. So I would love to get started with you sharing a little bit of information about yourself.
Great. Thank you for having me here. God, was it last year already?
Oh, it was like a year and a half ago. Yeah.
Gosh, it's so scary.
I know.
Time. Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, so quite a long time ago now. I had my original diagnosis 2015. And so November 2015. It was quite a shock. So I was diagnosed with a brain tumor out of nowhere. I had been living in Paris for about 10 years and I'm loving it. I was 31 when I was diagnosed.
I was going to ask you how old you were.
Yeah. So I had literally lived the best, most glamorous life in Paris all through my 20s. I was working in the fashion industry, having the absolute best time of my life. And quite suddenly, however, in 2015, my father had a heart attack and passed away overnight. And about 6 weeks after that, I had my first seizure, and I'd never had a seizure before, ever. I was in a coffee shop. I thought maybe, I've had too much caffeine because my eyes started getting a little bit shaky. And I was like, can't be that. Anyway, my eyes just started becoming so forceful by themselves, and they started jumping to the left. And I was like, that's weird. And I kept having to bring my eyes back to the center. And then they would keep pulling them to the side. And I was like, this is so weird. I'm like fighting with my own body here. But it got so strong and the movements were so violent that actually my whole head started to go. But I was completely conscious during this time. So I was kind of just at the coffee table with family, like, what is going on? I have no idea what's going on. And my boyfriend at the time, just held me and like told me to take a few breaths and just to calm me down. And so it passed really quickly. I must have just had that going on for like maybe 30 seconds, 45 seconds max.
Terrifying.
And I was just coming out of it. And I was just like in shock, basically, like, what was that? The coffee shop called like the paramedics to come. But by the time they'd arrived, really, I was kind of back to normal. All evidence of seizure gone. They took a few vitals, like shone a torch behind my eyes. Did a few reflex, like that kind of thing. They said, "Oh no, everything looks fine. You can go to the hospital if you want to, but we don't think there's anything wrong." And I was like, okay, that was the freakiest thing that's ever happened to me. I definitely want to go get checked out. So I went to the hospital. And again, it was A&E in London, central London.
And what does A&E stand for?
Accident and emergency.
Okay.
So it's when you haven't got an appointment and you just go.
Go in. We just call them emergency rooms here. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So yeah, and I think on that day, the doctor on call, I know now that if you're an adult and you've never had a history of a seizure, you should have a brain scan. But that wasn't done. They just thought that like, you've just lost your father, you're obviously in shock and there's a huge amount of stress. It's probably just a panic attack. And I was like, well, that makes sense, maybe. So then they said, well, go home. And obviously my father just died, and we were in London because his side of the family was in London. And so we actually then needed to go back to Paris because he passed away in France, and to take back his ashes back to Hong Kong. And so I got on a plane, flew back to Hong Kong, and we had his memorial ceremony back in Hong Kong. And then about a week later, I had my second seizure. And this time it was in my sleep. And my mum actually felt the bed moving because I was sleeping, keeping her company in bed after my dad died. And so had I not been sharing the bed with her,
You wouldn't have known.
just passed, no one would have known my bedroom was upstairs. It would have passed and that would never have been found. But obviously paramedics came again, and we hadn't actually told my mum at that point that what happened in London with the first seizure. We just didn't want to stress her out anymore.
Yeah, she had a lot going on.
Yeah. And so at this point, though, my brother had to then say, actually, something like this happened a few weeks ago. And so paramedics.
In between that time, those 2 times, were you having any problems with your eyes? Had you ever noticed anything again with your eyes doing
No,
that?
I went back to normal, like nothing in between. And I was completely how I am now, which is a bit freaky because obviously at the time it was undiagnosed at that point, brain tumor. But nothing in between, nothing to kind of, no other symptoms.
No headaches, no anything.
Absolutely nothing, which is a little bit scary. But so when it happens, when you've had 2 seizures, you have to get ruled out. Epilepsy has to be ruled out. So then they do have to do a brain scan. So at that point I was in Hong Kong. So I went to the public hospital, and that's when they found the mess. So at this point, they couldn't tell from a CT scan what it was, just a big shadow mass in the brain. And so already that was like, oh, that's crazy.
Yeah.
But they thought because it was so big, so it's in my right frontal lobe, so around here, about the size of an orange.
Oh, wow, that's
Into
huge.
2 parts. Yeah, but they thought because it's so big and you have no other symptoms, it must be benign. So they actually said, well, go back to Paris when I was working at the time, and come back at Christmas. So I would always go back to Hong Kong for Christmas. And at Christmas, we can then do a biopsy. That was a little bit scary. We sought a second opinion from a private neurosurgeon who was recommended to us. And he said, well, it's a little bit like a ticking time bomb, leaving it in there. So obviously a neurosurgeon is going to recommend surgery.
Right. And so massively huge.
Yeah. And so it made sense. I don't really want to be flying back, long haul flights with that in my brain still. So we decided, okay, I'll stay in Hong Kong and we'll book the surgery. But that neurosurgeon, in hindsight, really, I think, lucky. He was actually traveling for 6 weeks. It was for a month. He was lecturing around, I think the US or the UK. And so he said, okay, well, let's have it in 6 weeks' time. So you have time to get over your jet lag once you come back from your trip. Because I don't want you to be like tired doing brain surgery. Anyway, so we had it 6 weeks later. So this is now going to be 2nd of November, 2015. And so as soon as I found out that I had some kind of mass in my brain, I had actually been doing a lot of research on cancer 4 years before my diagnosis. And that's because one of my best friends in Paris, was actually trying to heal from a quite serious autoimmune condition called ankylosing spondylitis. We'd gone down a rabbit hole with natural health thing, and he gave me a book called Anti-Cancer, A New Way of Life. And this was 4 years in 2011, so 4 years before my diagnosis. And the author of that book actually had a brain tumor diagnosed at the same age as I was at 31. But he was a medical doctor, he's a French doctor, and he was practicing in the States. And they found his tumor just by accident. And he had gone down the medical route because all his medical colleagues had said, well, what should I do about it? And he said, well, there's only one thing you can do, which is radiotherapy, surgery, radiotherapy, chemotherapy. And he said, okay, is there anything else I should do? Like stop smoking, change anything? They're like, no, just do the treatment. So he did it. And then a year later, he had a recurrence. And obviously, and brain tumors, you can't normally have much radiation after the initial treatment that you have because you've had like your lifetime dose of radiotherapy. So he couldn't have more radiation, so he had to have more chemo. And the second time round, he asked his colleagues again, okay, so anything else I can do alongside? And again, no, there's nothing you can do. But he, luckily was smarter than that. And he obviously has a medical, as a doctor, he had access to all the medical literature. So he did a deep dive into researching, plants or anything that could help him. And he obviously found there is so much that you can do and foods that you can just find in your local supermarket that have all these properties that can really, help you against cancer and actually, be really effective at killing cancer cells. It was a lot of research and he put it all into this book. So here I am 4 years before I'm diagnosed, reading all of this research, and it's a really easy to read, accessible format as well. And I just finished that book and I was just like, oh my God, if I get cancer one day, I don't have to be scared because there's so much you can do. So I didn't have fear at all, actually, when I had my diagnosis. It was more like just disbelief because since I finished that book, I spent the next 4 years down a rabbit hole, reading every other book about cancer and how to heal naturally from it, and led me to functional medicine and getting to the root cause of, health conditions. And
Wow, how serendipitous, like the universe was speaking to you saying that you have something that's going to be coming up and we're going to prepare you for it.
exactly,
Wow.
it's just so crazy. And definitely made me feel, looking back, everything had to happen exactly the way it did, even to the point of my father dying, because again, like, had he not died, I wouldn't have been in sharing the bed with my mom. We wouldn't even, she wouldn't have felt the bed moving. I wouldn't have been diagnosed even. So everything's played a part, leading up to this. And so it made it difficult. It was great in one way because I didn't have the fear of cancer when I was diagnosed. I just knew I need to find a nutritionist who can guide me because I'd done all the reading. And so I was quite knowledgeable already, but I wanted like a professional who could guide me with the diet and supplements and things rather than me just trying to, guess and take
Which
things.
the two hardest things are, I guess, the three hardest things are: one, knowing that there's other things out there; two, understanding how those other things could help; and then three, implementing it. Actually, let me take a step back. The first one would be fear, right? So we know what a detriment fear plays in the whole process. And then understanding that there's other options. That's a hurdle. And then finding somebody. So you were already past the first two and you were saying, all right, just how do I do it? What do I need to do?
Yeah, exactly. So I immediately just went up to Google and just searched Hong Kong for functional medicine nutritionists. And first one that popped up was in an integrative health clinic right down, really not, Hong Kong's tiny, but it was not far at all. And they would see they do like nutrient infusions, like vitamin C. And I'd read so much about this already. So I knew like, this is exactly what, I think I need. So I saw him, and no one had mentioned cancer at that point. Even the hospital at this point wasn't really mentioning cancer because they thought it was benign. I was just booked to have surgery to remove it. There was no biopsy done, which now I know. I'm so glad didn't go down that route.
Can you explain that for a minute?
Well, my point of view is you've got this tumor in your brain, which is nice and isolated, and a biopsy is basically poking the bear. It's like poking a needle into this encapsulated tumor, which I truly believe cancer is really trying to help us and help us survive, and giving us a message that we cannot continue living our lives the way we were. And so, you don't want to just poke that.
Like pop in the balloon.
Yeah, exactly. And, cells can then leak out and, cause more damage.
Yeah.
So I'm glad I didn't go down that road. Again, everything had to happen just the way it did. It's 6 weeks before the surgery. And so I found my nutritionist, and no one was saying cancer, but he immediately said, it's a mess. that shouldn't be there. It's
regardless.
cells that are growing that shouldn't be there. That essentially is cancer. So he was the first one to immediately start calling it that. So that was kind of like, okay, this is serious. Yes, the oncologists aren't, well, the doctors at that point aren't calling it cancer. Anyway, so he started me on some rigorous testing. So we found out what my nutrient deficiencies were. We did some genomic testing to see if I was detoxing, like genetically well or not. We did some chemical toxicity testing, all of this costing quite a lot of money. And I actually, it was very expensive. And at this point, we didn't even know what we were dealing with yet. So we spent this money and got that information, started me off on a low carb, high fat diet. So keto wasn't really around yet in 2015. But he had actually done a lot of training with a doctor called Dr. William Kelly. He trained under someone who trained with Dr. Kelly. And just so that people know, so this was a dentist who came up with a treatment for cancer using high doses of pancreatic enzymes. And it was quite a full-on protocol. I didn't end up doing the pancreatic enzymes, but a big part of the dietary recommendations was raw liver every day.
Yum.
Delicious. So that was a big part of changing my diet and including that every day. Tons of vegetables. There was some green, vegetable juices. I mean, he really recommended blending the raw liver
with the juicing. Yeah.
Juice, which I thought, juice is hard enough. It is.
Yeah. Then add liver into it.
Yeah. So I ended up freezing the liver and making like frozen capsule, like frozen liver cubes.
Perfect.
With it, just so I could knock them back and not take them.
Yeah.
Anyway, so then I ended up having the surgery, and it's, during the surgery, they tested the cells, and it turned out it was a grade 3 anaplastic astrocytoma, which is an aggressive form of brain tumor from the same family as glioblastoma, which is one of the deadliest brain tumors. And so they obviously, at this point, whilst I was still in ICU, told my mom and my brother, it's actually quite aggressive. She's going to need to have follow-up chemotherapy and radiotherapy.
Wow.
The problem was, because of all my research 4 years leading up to this, I'd really gone down the natural health rabbit hole and didn't really see the sense of, poisoning the body with chemotherapy and radiation when you're trying to heal. So I was very anti it to the point that actually before the surgery, I wrote to the surgeon a letter saying, if I'm incapacitated after the surgery, because that was one of the risks, I might not be able to speak or move, I do not consent to having chemotherapy and radiotherapy. That's how much I really didn't want it. Yeah, just because I've done so much research, watched every documentary, and I wanted to have the surgery. And, once we found out it was, cancer and an aggressive one, but they removed all visible tumor. I was in a really fortunate position. I had 2 surgeons working on me in the surgery, and they got it all out. And my intention was, I'm such a good place right now. I want to go to a clinic where I can really nourish my body and my system, because this happened because obviously I was in really poor health. It didn't make sense to me to then have treatment that's going to make me even more sick. Anyway, very easier said than done. Obviously, it was me against doctors. It was me against family. We just lost my dad. Then, my mom has to hear her daughter's just got a serious brain tumor, brain cancer. So there's tons of fear from everybody else, whereas I was like super confident. Like, I just need to get to Germany where they've got these clinics, and they'll do all these natural therapies that are actually doing pretty much the same thing as chemo and radiation, just without the harm. So I was big on that, and I tried to make that happen. But again, I was up against so much, and in the end, it was causing such a rift between me and my brother and my mom, fighting just every single day, arguing nonstop. Couldn't even have a normal conversation. And so in the
they
end,
were operating out of fear. They love you.
yeah,
Yeah, it was
yeah,
just pure
totally.
fear, and the doctor saying, "Do this," and you're fighting against that. So, they're just
Yeah.
they're
I
afraid.
mean, they thought I was crazy. They thought, oh, it's the brain tumor that's talking. Like, you're not talking sense. You have to have the treatment. Um, and then it just got to the point where I could feel stress literally bubbling under my skin.
Mhm.
For all my research, I knew that stress is the number one killer, the number one thing we got to, work on when you've got cancer. So I was like, you know what? It's going to come back quicker if like I keep this arguing and stuff. So I decided to do the treatment, but with my nutritionist who worked in this integrative health clinic, really do as much as I could alongside the treatment. So continuing with the radical diet, um, and then adding in, we did some infusions, IV intravenous infusions, loads of supplements, just correcting all my deficiencies, just really getting me back to, super strong. I never felt healthy in my life. Like before the surgery, I knew I was so healthy. And I had those 6 weeks before the surgery, which so many people don't have that time,
Right.
Especially in this country, in the UK. As soon as you're diagnosed, 2 days later, you're like wheeled in for surgery or you start chemo or radiation. Like you have zero time to even work on anything. So my situation I was so fortunate I had that time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, whenever I'm, speaking to people with cancer now, it's like, just, clean up your body and make sure you're healthy before you go into anything.
Yeah, really prepare for it. If you're going to do it or not going to do it, even if you're going to do it, and doing it can be very, very effective if your body is ready for it.
Exactly.
All of that work, that 6 weeks of work that you had, and then how long, and I just want to, for anybody listening, so that was in 2015, your diagnosis, and today it's September 2024. So we're, at least 9 years. So I just want to put that
Right
out there
into the years.
because, when you hear about brain tumors, people think, one, you can't survive them, and two, stage 3, stage 4, you have a very short life expectancy. So, this is really, we're doing this to educate and also help people feel empowered, and just know that there are lots of people that are living way past their expiration dates. And so I wanted to just make sure and emphasize that and make sure we put the timestamp on this. But so you had the 6 weeks, and then how long after your surgery did you start, and how much chemo and radiation did you do?
I was diagnosed in Hong Kong, so I had the surgery there. And so after I decided, okay, I'm going to do this treatment, which I really don't want to do, but if it's going to save me the stress from fighting with my family, then fine. Then I got 5 opinions from 5 different oncologists because I wanted to see, like, well, okay, what is all the treatments they're offering? And everyone said a different version of the same treatment. So for brain tumors, standard of care is 6 weeks of radiotherapy combined with chemotherapy, and then a break, and then you have higher dose oral chemotherapy. It's all oral chemotherapy for a further. This is where they differed. So some was saying 6 months, better chemo for 6 months on its own at a higher dose. Some of them said it's for a year, and then some of them said indefinitely. And of course, because I was more inclined into not wanting treatment more than doing it, I said, well, and I asked them, like, what is the research showing that, 12 months is more effective than 6 months? And there wasn't really any research to back that. So I said, well, I'll do the 6 months afterwards. So I ended up having the surgery. I had to wait a month after surgery for the scar to heal, and before you could have the radiotherapy, because then it's just blasting.
Right.
And so I had a month wait. So again, a month to continue getting stronger, being on the diet, on all the supplements. So that again, giving me more time to get really prepared before even starting the treatment.
And did you notice anything in that time? Did you start feeling better? You didn't have any symptoms, but did you notice a shift in feeling different?
It was hard, but leading up to the surgery, definitely just feeling the best I've ever felt. Dropped like excess weight. everyone thought that was the cancer. Like, oh my God, you're losing so much weight. And I was like, no, I'm just eating it really well. And I'm not drinking alcohol anymore, which is making me so puffy and stuff. But yeah, there was a lot of pushback on everything I was doing. Every supplement I took, it's rolling of eyes. When I'd asked to eat like what I needed to eat for the diet, it was like, oh my God, and then my family just eating whatever they wanted in front of me, like not really, helping at all. And looking back, I'm like, well, wouldn't expect them to, but it just created such animosity between us. It was horrible, to the point that when I did decide to do the treatment, I asked my mum if I could move out and just, get my own place near a hospital, just so I could have my own space and not, because I was doing it for them,
Right.
doing it because I wanted to do it. And I was like, I can't look at you every day while I'm doing this treatment that I don't want to do and come home every day to you guys. So, I was really fortunate. My mom was really generous. She, paid for a little studio apartment next to the hospital for me. And so I could just, 5-minute walk to literally walk to the hospital every day for my radiotherapy. And then because all of this nutrition stuff and all the supplements, all the testing and the IVs was getting really expensive at this point. And then after that point, I knew it was cancer. So it's like, okay, this is like full on. We got to hit it with as much as we can. It got really expensive. And obviously all this fighting with my family, I didn't want to ask for any money from them because I didn't want like me doing the things I knew I needed to do to help me to be dependent on, them paying for it.
Yeah.
So I decided to crowdfund to be able to afford it all. So I decided to video blog every day of my treatment because I was in this nice little studio, so I had my own space. And so on my GoFundMe for all the donations, everyone was so generous. I said, well, at least at the same time I can give back and raise awareness about what it's like to have a brain tumor and go through treatment. And these are all the things I'm doing on the side and how it's really helping me. So that got me like going, that really has helped me, afford all the organic food, all the supplements, all the appointments with the nutritionist and all the natural therapies. And that's how I kind of got through it. But it was really to help me afford to get to Germany, to the clinic afterwards, because obviously I couldn't go there instead of the treatment. But I decided, okay, I'll do all this treatment and then I'll go to Germany for 6 weeks and, get super healthy and, detox. But in the end, I didn't raise enough to be able to afford the clinic. And so I used money at that point to just find the therapies in London, because actually I had to move back from Paris to London after I finished treatment, because I was so sure at this point that I literally wanted to be my nutritionist and like help people with cancer and like get through it. Because it was, after all those 4 years of reading, I was already so so absorbed in everything to do with cancer. Like I wanted to open like a anti-cancer shop, because I couldn't believe all these like products that are just so dangerous for people with health conditions, all the hidden sugar and, the marketing is just ridiculous. I wanted to have a store where everything is like safe for people with cancer to buy. So I was really like, in it. And so, well, no one was listening to me because I was just like someone who got brain cancer. So I was like, I need to go back, get a qualification. So I moved back after I finished treatment to London. So I had my 6 months of chemo, moved back to London. And then that autumn, I signed up and started a 4-year diploma in nutritional therapy in London. Because it was the only place I could find. I couldn't study functional medicine in Paris. It's too old France. So I knew I could go to London where they could teach that kind of nutrition. And then started that right after I finished treatment. And then 2020, just as lockdown hit, I graduated and opened my private clinic and have been supporting people with cancer, since 2021.
Wow. That is amazing.
Thanks. So cancer's really, gave me that opportunity. The job I was in Paris before my diagnosis, it was soul sucking. It was not, it was glamorous at the beginning, but I overstayed it. I should have left, 3 years before my diagnosis. But the cancer was a wake-up call, and I said, this is your chance. Get out.
Something's got to change because you can't survive in this environment anymore.
Wow.
Wow.
I mean, it was a lot of the things I was doing up until that point. I was a chain smoker, I was binge drinking, but as was everyone else my age, and it was completely normal. And it's only after doing, testing, after the diagnosis, that, finding out that, wow, I have zero tolerance for alcohol in my
Right.
genetics. And I've run so many DNA reports on my clients since then. I haven't seen that one, like zero tolerance.
Yeah.
So,
And we know that brain tumors, they're very, they can be very assertive and they can adapt. And so you have to, it's not something that you live very, very differently all the time, right? So there's a lot that you do now, and it's just kind of more of a lifestyle.
oh yeah, for sure. I mean, you can't go back, once you know certain things. Um, I mean, the alcohol thing kind of made it easier for me to, then go out and not have it, and, sometimes that's hard, we're not living the life we used to. And it wasn't a hard decision. Once you have that information, it's
Right.
like, okay, it's just really dangerous for me. So,
And what
that
is
makes
what does your mom and your brother think now? Are they more accepting of it, or do they think that it was, the chemo and the radiotherapy? I mean, kind of what is where are things
I mean,
at
they're
now?
really proud of me, how I've come through it all. Yeah, my brother still thinks, it was just a treatment, the chemotherapy and the radiotherapy, and that's fair enough. But I know that it was a combination of doing everything and continuing today, even 9 years later. There's still so much work of, inner work. I would say,
Yeah.
all the physical stuff, the supplements and the diet. I always tell people that's the easy part. It's like it's doing the, who am I, and you know, how was I living? And, really all the stuff I'm working on now is just letting go of stuff that just it doesn't matter.
Oh, yeah.
I think
So
that's still got a long way to go, but that's where my focus is now. It's more on the emotional, spiritual stuff.
yeah. Yeah, that is the hardest thing. Absolutely. It's all the physical things are just an
Yeah.
action, just doing them.
Exactly. Exactly. But yeah, and just always exploring different things. Like I try every, if I find someone I want to refer clients to, I'll see them first, I'll work on something of mine with them, do I feel a difference? Or with any kind of um, new supplement that comes out, we hear about, I'll only try and recommend things that I've done.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's always there's something new posted on Facebook every day about somebody cured themselves with this, that's always
Yeah.
such a hard thing. So now you are are you just work with individuals with cancer, or you work with yeah. And how is
Well,
that? Because I know a lot of people, when they've had cancer, working with other people with cancer can be kind of emotionally triggering. So do you feel that? And if you do, how do you deal with it?
so it comes in waves. So I think for me, it really accumulates like over a period of like a year, and then it'll all get too much, and I'll kind of have a breakdown, and then do a lot of work around emptying like all of that emotional stuff that I've taken on from like people. Because yeah, you lose people, and you get really close in this work to people, and yeah, you really build a lot of relationships.
It's
You
hard.
know, it can be really hard. Oh, so I mean, meditation has been really helpful for me. But also when I had my last breakdown, let's say that was 2022, around November time, and luckily we had a retreat going on for metabolic approach to cancer growth in Europe, so it aligned really well. And it all came up, how much grief I had. But it also realized, I hadn't grieved like all of the stuff that, I lost from the diagnosis, but also my dad, because, he died 3 months just before, my diagnosis. And so that kind of took away, my time grieving for him.
Right.
And then just grieving, like, the life I lost, even though, of course, I didn't lose a life. But obviously, you kind of lose couldn't be the Jenny going out and, like, drinking. And, I was a chain smoker as well back then. I just had to say goodbye to that kind of lifestyle. But also just like, friendships that, might have fallen away. And people just haven't died, but you've just lost certain relationships. And there's so much grief for my whole life that I hadn't really dealt with ever. And then I was taking on grief of, clients and losing clients. And and that kind of thing. And also just friends in the community. Once you have cancer, you
Yeah.
kind of this amazing group of people.
I was going to ask,
And you
that
do
was the
find-
retreat where one of the girls in our community had a little bit of a challenge, right? And ended up in the hospital. Was that the same time? Was that kind of the triggering event?
No, it was a different retreat.
Okay, different retreat.
And this was just one. It all came out with just we had a circle, and we were passing around like a talking stick, basically, and just exploring like what we're experiencing doing this kind of work. And I just couldn't control my emotions. It all just came out like, this is so hard, and it all just came rolling out. But actually, one of the therapists who came to that retreat, as she was doing treatment on me, she was asking, where do you live? And I said, oh, I moved down to South Devon from London, just in the countryside. She's like, amazing. I'm actually going to a grief ritual in a couple of weeks. Would you want to come? So obviously she's seen my outburst about this grief. And I was like, grief ritual? What is that? And it was a 3-day, like a weekend, random people coming together, all wanting to grieve together, but co-creating an African village. Where in Africa, someone dies and the whole village kind of comes together and celebrates, that person. But we set up like a grief altar, a forgiveness altar, and then an ancestor altar, and you've got everyone's chanting the whole time, and people go up to the grief altar, and you can let out everything that you want to grieve about. And there's always someone who comes to stand behind you to hold space behind you. So you're not, you're there with that support, and then you let it all out. And then obviously, like we always know after a good cry, you always feel better, right? So then you're like, okay, you've let all of that out. So then you go back into the circle of the village, you're dancing and everyone's chanting. And you just literally keep doing that until another wave of grief comes out. And then you go back to the grief altar, and everyone's just, going back and forth to the grief altar. And either you're standing supporting
how are these
or you're the person grieving. And, for like 2 days solid doing that.
Wow.
And it was unbelievable. And you're not just you go through all your stuff, you're grieving, and then you start grieving for ancestors you've never met, and all the men that went to war for their countries and their families, and you start just grieving for everybody in the whole world.
That is so powerful.
So powerful. And that really was a turning point. And after that, obviously, really emptied my bucket. And so I was so able to take on so much more after that. And then, I think that was really great. And then last year I found a amazing yoga teacher down in Devon who does trauma release exercises at the end of the yoga session. So I started going to that on a weekly basis. So I could do it all the time whilst I'm still working. And so every week having a release. So trauma release exercises, for anyone doesn't know. So animals naturally have this program and instinct in them. So when they have a trauma, so you see a deer run across the road, they, deer caught in headlights, they are totally freaked out, all their stress hormones rushing through their system. They naturally will go into into hiding and literally shake off the stress. And us humans have just literally forgotten this part of us.
Bottling it up.
Just bottle it up and like get on with the next day, and like, well, don't cry. God, don't show your emotions in any way. And so every week I have this opportunity to just let my nervous system release anything that I might be holding on to. And so I've continued that now as part of just my routine.
Wow.
I think that's been really powerful. It's helping me deal with stuff.
Yeah. So important. I mean, we do have this thing, don't be vulnerable, don't let people see you cry. And, when you go into the workforce, it's one of those things where it's like, you have to just be tough as nails and, all of these things. And it just really suppresses all of our emotions. I think that, like getting together as community, the retreat and doing that circle, those things can be so powerful. And look at all of the things that it led to. Like, we need to come together more as community. I'm actually at a Airbnb. We had an event last night. Dr. Nasha was in town, and it was a farmers event and medical events, kind of like food as medicine thing. And we just, everybody came into this space, and we had a nice meal. We had some food from the chef's garden donated to us. So we had really good, just nutritious food. And we all got around in a circle and we said what we were grateful for and shared anything that we wanted to share. And it's just so powerful when you have that
It
community,
really, yeah.
and being able to break down in front of people that you trust and are going to support you is really amazing.
Yeah, it's really, really powerful. Yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at now. I'm just loving my life. I've created the life I want. I have my own online clinics. I love all the people I work with. It's hard work, definitely, emotionally, but so rewarding,
Yeah.
scary at times, but just doing the best I can at helping people and giving them hope as well. That, it's not all doom and gloom. People can live so well with cancer these days.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. So one question that I ask everybody is, from a quality of life perspective, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your life before and how would you rate your life now?
Well, before the diagnosis, I thought I had great quality of life. I thought, but now, well, afterwards, and putting in the work afterwards, I know that definitely wasn't quality of life. I was deeply unhappy in many areas of my life. I just didn't know it. And now on the other side, mm, never felt better. I've never been happier. I've never been, um, just more confident about who I am now and doing something that I'm passionate about. Never had that before. So quality of life, now, yeah, I can easily say 10. And back then, I probably would have said, 8, but I know it was more like a 5.
Yeah, you don't know what you don't know. I mean, oftentimes we don't know we feel bad. We don't know that we are feeling psychologically, mentally, emotionally bad, physically bad, until we start to feel better. And then you're like, oh, that's what it's supposed to feel like. So if somebody was in the UK, I guess maybe UK, Europe, and they are looking for somebody to work with, how would they get a hold of you? Where can they go to find you?
So easiest place is my website, which is www.bertramclinic.com. So my last name is Bertram, Bertram, so bertramclinic.com. And just contact me through the website. I work with people kind of on a 3-month base minimum. So I'm not going to waste my energy trying to help you if you're not even going to, commit to that amount of time. And it's a little bit like a coaching style that I'd like to do, because it's hard work making the changes at first, but by 3 months, we can cover a lot of the testing that's needed, and we can really try to understand, like, why did this happen in the first place? So if you don't know why it happened, you can't make the changes necessary to make sure it doesn't come back. Really want people to help understand, like, oh, okay, now I understand why this happened in the first place. And these are all correctable things that I can do.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That's the most important thing. It's so hard. It's very hardworking too with people when they kind of don't believe or maybe half believe. So that is very, very important aspect of it. And, kind of going deep when you do get that diagnosis to see what is going on. Like I need to just process this for a minute.
Yeah. And I would say, shop around. I mean, a lot of us in the UK will offer like discovery calls for free. So that's what I'll always have with someone, just an introductory call, for them, but also for me. I don't want to work with someone that I don't get a good vibe off from the get-go.
Yeah.
So, and if, I can always refer on to someone else, who might want to take them on. But yeah, shop around because you want to make sure that the people that are supporting you through this journey, which is a long one, not a quick fix. Even when you're through the other side, people say, oh, I'm done with treatment. I've, had my mastectomy, I'm all cured.
Right.
I hate to be a Debbie Downer, but I'm always like, you really can't easily say that. It'd be nice to be confident. I remember one of the books I did read after my diagnosis was Cancer Free, Are You Sure? And it's kind of like it asked all those questions and like all the tests that you can do just to, give yourself a bit more confirmation rather than just thinking, what the oncologists have said, like, done what we've done now, you're out the other side.
Yeah. Yeah. And our body's muscle memory. So if it's done it once, it can do it again, It'll learn how to do it again if it's sick, right? And I know I've said this before, but I'll just say it again if somebody hasn't listened to some of the other ones. Cancer cells are created because cell death breaks. When our cells get sick, they die. But when any cells are supposed to run their course, they just die. Apoptosis is cell death, and when a cell gets sick, it's supposed to go into cell death. And cancer forms when apoptosis is broken, when cell death is broken. And that can happen again when our body gets sick. So that's why it's something that, we have this false sense of security with remission. And that's really the time where you need to put the effort in to work on healing the body, physically, mentally, emotionally, in every capacity.
Yeah. Because we don't often also realize that, when our cells become stressed to the point that they can't make energy in the same way as a healthy cell, then they switch to this, ancient form of metabolism, which then, is cancer cell metabolism. But what are those stresses? You got to figure out, okay, what was I doing that was causing the stress on those cells? And that if you don't address those and just go back to living your life the way you were, before all your treatment, just going to create the same cocktail, for that to happen again. So, and obviously conventional oncology are all about is just a genetic condition and anything you do about it. It's about genetics and mutations, gene mutations, but it's like, well, what caused the gene mutations in the first place?
Yeah.
So it's all those things to explore and then change those.
Yeah, the gene dysfunction didn't come first, right? Something had to turn it on, right? There's something happening that turned that on. And I think that's a big thing to clarify and understand. So, Gillian, thank you so much for sharing your story. I really appreciate it. And I know that this is going to make a huge difference to hopefully lots of people. We can be empowered, and there is a lot of things that we can do. And I'm just so happy you're here to tell your story 9 years later and doing well and helping so many people.
Yeah. I'll just end. I just want to say one last thing is that, if anyone's just being diagnosed, just to do as much read around and researching as you can. Again, I had 4 years of time to research before mine, and that just made such a huge difference. And just read about every therapy. Everyone's got a different cure that they've done, but don't hesitate just to explore all of them. And whichever one makes the most sense to you, you can create your own program treatment for you. But everything you do has to make sense, because the whole, biology of beliefs, that's got to go behind everything that you do, every supplement you take, every treatment you decide to pay for and do. It's got to make sense to you, because then your whole system is,
placebo effect is a real thing. And I love Biology of Belief, Bruce Lipton. If anybody wants to add to their reading list, it's such an incredible book.
Yes.
Yeah.
Really good.
Well, thank you so much.